Welcome to the revolution. 60,000 soldiers who are losing not only their benefits, but also their pay for not following the mandate, which I find to be atrocious and infuriating. A former military veteran myself, could not imagine having raised my right hand and committing my life to, defend our government and, the United States against enemies, both foreign and domestic, only to eventually get my pay taken away from me for not wanting to follow a mandate about my own body. So I find that to be interesting. Let's go ahead and read this article. It says, U.S. Army halting pay, benefits, and active status for 60,000 unvaccinated Guard and Reserve soldiers. It goes on to say that soldiers who refuse the order without an approved or pending exemption request are subject to adverse administrative actions, including flags, bars to service, and official reprimands, said an Army spokesperson. It goes on to say that the U.S. Army has cut around 40,000 National Guardsmen and 22,000 reservists from service and pay for refusing to get their jab. The service members were given a deadline that ended on Thursday to receive the vaccine. The figure makes up around 13% of the National Guardsmen and 12% of reservists. So that would be, a total between the two of those of 25% of our total military force in the Guards and Reserves, which is terrifying. Terrifying, especially if you consider the fact that we're in one of the very first hot wars among other countries, saying that with quotations. And the reason I'm doing that is because if you followed along from the very beginning, this is just a proxy war. This is absolutely just a proxy war between the United States and Russia over Ukraine. And you see that, if we'll do it on the next episode. I'm really interested about diving into that. But the Hunter Biden phone that got leaked, I went down a huge rabbit hole last night and basically read through a bunch of different emails. You can actually find a website, but we'll go over all of that. But there's a huge correlation between the Biden family, Ukraine, and what is actually happening in Russia today. So don't get it confused. This is not a war between Zelensky and Putin. This is a proxy war between NATO and the UN and Vladimir Putin, not wanting Ukraine to be a part of it, and us, if giving billions and billions and billions of dollars to Ukraine to fight a war that isn't even ours. So in the middle of that, in the midst of us deciding to give tanks to Taiwan, and also interjecting billions, tens of billions of dollars to Ukraine in a war that's not even ours, inciting one of the world's largest nuclear superpowers, we're also going to cut 25% of our fighting force in the middle of all that for making their own bodily decisions about their medical status. It makes absolutely no sense. Now, what this article goes on to say is we are in the midst of a recruiting crisis in the Army. This is for one of the first times ever this year. They did not meet their quotas in recruiting. They are having a very, very difficult time recruiting individuals to Joe Biden's military. Okay. Now, one can only imagine why in the midst of all this crisis and the lack of leadership and the weak the weak president that we see in office that they would be defending against. But also, I think a lot of people are just waking up to the military industrial complex, right? I think it's probably a mix of things. I mean, obviously, a lot of people, right? Still, 35% or 35% or so of people, don't quote me on that, it's probably wrong, but a good percentage of people are still unvaccinated. And, a good percentage of people who are willing to go into the military are primarily going to be, your more right-leaning younger individuals. And those individuals have no reason to get vaccinated and generally have a philosophical belief that they don't want to be, which is causing a, difficulty in the recruiting process where, not only are they maybe not approving of the current state of our governmental administration, but also not approving of, the barrier to entry to have to, jab themselves with a experimental gene therapy. So that seems to be all coming together to cause a very difficult crisis in the midst of probably the worst time ever when we're the closest to, don't get this confused. We are the closest to a world war than we have been since 1942. So, the fact that now we're dealing with this, the fact that now we're dealing with a crisis in recruiting is terrifying. And it should terrify you too, especially when we're, later on what we're going to discuss, arming the enemies of one of the world's largest superpowers. It's quite concerning. So the Army's doing a couple things to try and combat this recruiting issue. The first thing that they're doing is making it so that you can show tattoos on your hands and on your wrists. We'll see how many people with wrist tattoos are going to help with the 13 to 25% of people that they're getting rid of in the Army currently. And then the other one was going to be, there was one more thing. Oh, just this little thing called a GED that you no longer have to go into the Army. Now, this sounds a lot like an intentional, purposeful way of taking our military, the strongest military the world has ever seen, ever, and dwindling it down to a bunch of individuals who are uneducated by bringing in people who don't have GEDs, who don't, maybe have the general political leanings that we see within the military, right? You survey the military. I'm sure we can find statistics on this, but you will generally find that the average military individual is not going to be hyper liberal Antifa members. Wonder why, but that's what you're going to find. And so when you see that all come together, we're finding these recruiting issues coming into place. And at the very same time, the U.S. Army is now literally not firing them, not allowing them to, get a discharge. They're just not paying them. They're just giving them official reprimands and bars of service. So it's puzzling to me. It seems, with all of these things coming together, not only making the average IQ in the military go down immediately after passing the fact that you don't have to have a GED anymore to go into the military, and then also the fact that you have to get vaccinated and they're getting rid of 60,000 soldiers' pay. Now, what does that do to morale? Right? Not only just these 60,000 people, but also the friends of these individuals, right? How many people do these 60,000 people know within the military that are now going to be frustrated that their buddy down the hall, who's done nothing wrong and has dedicated his life to his service in the military, is now not getting paid by the very employer that they have, right? Because what's next? What are they going to decide not to pay their soldiers for after that? And that would probably concern me if I was still in the military.